much for joining us today. I hope you can hear me okay. Yes. All right, thank you, Sarah, for your introduction. And I also want to thank CU on the weekend for collaborating with our music theory department on this series. It's been a real pleasure for us. So first of all, you should have two handouts, one that is a blank sheet of paper, just with a title on top, and then another sheet of text. Musical conversations. So our time today will be a conversation and not just a presentation, and I hope you're going to participate. There is my email on the top of your handout, and I would welcome any comments or questions after today. And also, we do have an email list, which I think is going around if you would like to continue to be connected to the music theory department. And we only send out a few emails a year, so it's not going to flood your inbox. Finally, we're videotaping today's presentation, and that's just for departmental publicity, and then possibly also to talk about public music theory. So, what do you hear? Let's get started. I am first going to talk to you about a piece by Ligeti, Hungarian composer, three fantasies after the poet Friedrich Hölderlin. And I've given you the text, your one-page text handout is the text for the second movement, Wenn aus der Ferne. If out of the distance, since we are apart, I am still recognizable to you. Tell me, how does your friend await you? In those gardens where after terrible and dark times we found each other. How did the hours pass? How lifeless was my soul at the truth that I had been so alone. Was it spring? Was it summer? The nightingale with sweet song lived with birds that were not far away in the shrubbery, and trees surrounded us with scents. The ivy grew, making green a soulful darkness of high alleys. Often in the evenings and mornings we were there, talking and looking at each other joyfully. Ah, woe is me. Those were beautiful days, but sad twilight followed. We are going to listen to about the first half of this piece, up to the squiggle that I've marked on the left side of your text. And could you please take the other piece of blank paper and jot down 5 observations, anything that comes to your mind, about what you're hearing. And then I'd like to talk to you about your observations.
I just have a question. Is this meant for...
It's not, you don't have to know anything about the music we're talking about.
Is it meant for the uninitiated?
Yes, absolutely, the uninitiated. This is great.
So it's not just for those who...
It's not just for those in the know. Definitely not. In fact, that's the whole purpose. This presentation, yes. Okay, so here we go. Okay, I'm gonna stop it there. What did you hear? It can be the most obvious thing, like it wasn't a piano, right? What did you hear? Yes.
Sounded like waves.
Waves, okay. I'm gonna take notes here on what you're saying. So let's just make this a little bigger here. And, okay. So, waves. What else? Yes.
So, two things. The sound of, I thought it was the sound of the wind in the trees.
Okay.
And there was definitely a lament.
Lament. Very nice. And there was another hand?
Right.
Yes.
It was celestial sounding.
Celestial. Okay, so very light and up in the air. Yes. Sorry?
True. Sorry.
So just a little girl over here?
Instead of using instruments, they were in different voices.
Different voices, yeah. And was it a lot of voices or just a few? A lot of voices. We actually had 16 different vocal lines going on, so that was a great observation. Voices. A lot. You'll have to excuse my typos, and then over here.
True to the text, it did seem like it was coming out of the distance and then getting closer.
Awesome. Out of a distance. And there was someone else over here.
There was no clear melody.
Okay. No clear melody. Was there a melody at all? Did anyone hear a melody? We can talk about this. Okay, a couple hands over here.
Fragmentary melodies and not a conventional song structure.
Okay, fragmentary. That's not supposed to be smaller, but hopefully you can kind of see it. Fragmentary melodies. Cool. So not a whole melody, but certainly parts of one, yes.
I do notice lots of melodies.
Not lots of melodies?
Lots of
melodies. Very interesting. Can you tell us a little bit more of what you mean by that?
Well, one melody was here, the other melody was there, and then there is a climax at one point,
Okay.
and then the climax comes down again.
Okay. I'm going to put multiple lines, many melodies going on at once, and not always at the same time, kind of overlapping, right? Okay, yes, a couple more.
So my guess would be that relative to this idea about no clear melody, if we were to hear this 20 times in a row, I'll bet we would hear a melody out of it eventually.
So,
We'd be able to discern the melody.
right, melodies, perhaps after further or deeper listening, not necessarily always obvious on the surface. Okay, I'm not further listening. Okay, well, you get it. Okay.
A lot of like unclear entrances and exits.
Okay, what do you mean by unclear? That's
Like
a
they
really-
kind of fade in and out, and you kind of
Yeah.
notice it. they're
Okay,
gone.
so what's happening with all these voices? There's 16 different voices. So unlike a 4-voice choir that you normally have, the sopranos, there are 4 different lines. The altos, there are 4 different, tenors 4, and basses 4. And so what's happening at that opening? And I think what I want to do now is... here's what we need to do. Okay, good. So now what I want to do is kind of show you a bit of a picture. And the picture happens to be the score. But don't worry if you can't read music, because you can kind of see what's going on even if you don't read music. So let's talk about these fragmentary melodies that you picked up on. This is how it starts. Can you sing that with me? On La. La, 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 la. Now this is where it goes. It's a little unexpected, but it opens just like a regular tonal piece. Like this could be any one of a number of composers from the past. Let's say a romantic composer or something. But now, what did the voices do? And we had our younger audience member over there point out there were lots of voices, and what did they do? They come in. They come in imitating one another exactly, but they overlap so tightly. So one voice and then another one and another one until you end up with this very thick texture from a really simple little melody. And in part, that's why the motive was so hard to hear, because it gets sort of obscured and stuff.
Would you call this echo?
It's actually called canon, and the specific technique here is called micro canon. So canon is like a round when you're saying, row, row, row. Oh no, what's this? Anyways, I don't remember the title. But the interesting thing about this canon, very tonal, but when this note comes in, it sort of starts filling in sort of a little bit more dissonant, a little bit more sort of distant, a little more chromatic, and so you end up with a sort of sound mass where the individual lines get a little bit lost because there's so much stuff in it. So this is our first motive. So I'd like you to listen to this opening little melody again. Actually, now the next little melody we get is right here, and you can see how it does the same thing. The text here, the first text was "Wenn aus der Ferne," from a distance. The next text is "Ich dir noch kennbar bin," will I still be recognizable to you? And this is what we hear what's happened to our opening melody. And this now is see how it's transformed? It's longer, it starts off the same, and am I still recognizable to you? Now the next little bit that we get is, it's going to start right here, and now you'll notice we have two voices together. They're paired. It's not single voices coming anymore, but two voices, two voices, two voices, two voices. And notice these are all the female voices at the very top. So we have these pairs of voices saying, "Zhou Zaga, tell me." And so it's a little bit more insistent because we have now pairs of voices saying this. And one thing that is interesting is up till now the canons, the imitations, have been all at the same pitch level. It's always, now this one starts sliding down. So the first Zhou Zaga is here. The next Zhou Zaga is here. The next one is here. And the next one is here. So you can hear how they just cascade all the way down from here to here to here to there on the Zhou Zagas. Okay, I better move a little bit more quickly because we'll never get to all of the music I'd like to tell you about, but there's one other one. The next one is in those gardens, in Jenen Gärten. And once again, the imitation is not at the same level, but did you hear those little dots of sound where it was 10, so it went Gärten, 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 Gärten. Did you hear those? And they're coming down different levels of pitch, not the same level of pitch. Am I making sense? Mm-hmm. So the imitation is just sliding down. And now notice on the Gärtens that sopranos, altos, and now we're heading into the tenors too, so we go lower down. What happened at War es Frühling, war es Sommer? Was it spring, was it summer? Anyone notice? Okay. What I would like to do is listen once again, but this time, so it's a bit messy, but this is my little map of what happens in the piece, and hopefully you can see. So here is the first canon, and I've wrote the text up here, "Wenn aus der Ferne." Here's the next one, "Ich dir, am I still recognizable to you?" The next canon, the canon in pairs of voices, Jenen Gärten, and then you can ignore this. This is just sustained notes, and then this. War es Frühling? War es Sommer? What happened? Did the voices ever line up together? That's where they all line up all together. Yes, please.
So at the very end, I thought all of them heard real chords.
Yeah. So at the end, so they,
Almost like parts, like the
yeah. Yeah, totally cool. So we have all these lines, and then it's like everyone's together. Was it spring? Was it summer? And then after that, it's the nightingale. And you might have heard the nightingale bopping around, and again, it's imitation, but this time it's not just sliding down. It's like bop. You see how all those things bop around? So let's listen once again and see if we can hear some of those things. Okay, any questions or comments? Yes?
Do you have a name for this kind of like map of these?
This map?
Kind of diagram?
An analyst graphic of a piece. That's about as technical as it gets. It helps sometimes to have a visual. Any other comments? Yes?
When you showed us the music, what clock was it?
What clef was it? They were all in treble and bass clef. But you might have heard that the really low voices were actually not just on the regular notes, but also in between them. Okay. So this piece fits very broadly into a trend in 20th century music that we often call textural music. And that's when the individual elements build up in such a way that you create thick textures so that the individual elements are sometimes not even distinguishable. That's one trend. Today we're going to talk about 3 such trends, starting with serialism. Then we'll look again briefly at textural music, which starts around 1950s, 1960s, and then we'll conclude with minimalism. So, serialism. Right, 12-tone music. It's built on, as you would guess, 12 tones. It's built on some ordering of the 12 chromatic notes. So here's the 12 chromatic notes. Now, tonal music is built on how many usually? 7. It's a subset of those. Here's these 7 with the chromatic notes. Okay, so there's our 12 chromatic notes. And what composers do with 12-tone music, how many of you, I'm sure many of you are familiar with 12-tone or serial music or you've heard of it. But what composers do is take those 12 notes and make what is called a row or a series. The way that they order those 12 notes, their row has a huge influence on the sound of the piece that is built on that realm. Let's listen to a piece by the Italian composer Luigi Della Piccola. And this piece is called Musical Notebook for Anna Libera, written in 1952. Anna Libera was his daughter, and it was dedicated to her on her 8th birthday. You can imagine her saying, Dad, how about a bike? But anyways, this is a piece. I'm going to use an LP because I like this performance. And it also happens to be by my teacher, David Burge, who's a well-known contemporary music pianist. But once again, I'd like you to jot down the observations, whatever you notice. And then afterwards, I'll ask you to turn to your neighbors and share what you've heard and discuss your observations. Turn to 2 or 3 people around you and just share your observations. Discuss what you heard.
Just whatever you pick up. Yeah. It reminded me of like bouncing sound on the wall. Because it was like main notes and then there was like this subtle in between those two. Yeah, that's makes a lot. Yeah, kind of plain symmetry. Fit. Yeah. I had that. But I wouldn't think it was a 12-note thing. It's pretty subtle. It's pretty subtle. You're right. I couldn't. Yeah. I was bouncing around and wasn't having straight. Yeah. That's what we were doing before it came out. It's hard to follow. So this sounds like I play on the piano when I don't know what I'm doing. But if I'm in a good mood, I'm good at it.
All right, everyone. Would anyone like to share a point of or two? Breathe. Yes.
Tone color melody.
Tone color melody. Can you tell us a little bit what you mean by that?
It didn't sound like a conventional melody. It sounded like the melody sounded fragmented at first listening.
Okay.
But there's also the row
Okay.
is
Okay.
acting on that.
Okay. So there are certain timbres going on and certainly colors, right? All right. Somebody else. Yes, please.
So we were thinking it sounded kind of childlike or tentative.
Okay. Very nice. Childlike, tentative. Great. In terms of atmosphere, there was someone over here. Yes.
I thought there was a very distinct melody that was very central to the piece, and then some supplemental notes were sort of accompanying that melody.
With accompaniment. Very interesting. Like to talk about what that melody is.
Seemed to have like a clear shape, kind kind of like moving, actually starting, going up and coming down.
Okay, so shape. Anybody else? Any others? Yes.
It seemed very hesitant and gentle to me, and it felt there was a kind of harmonious feel to it for it being atonal music. There was enough, I don't know intellectually what I'm trying to say, but there was a sense of peacefulness and harmony.
This is so interesting because people talk about serial music and think it has a particular kind of sound. But you know, serial music can really have, the fact that you're using the 12 tones or a row does not control the kinds of sounds that you're going to get. So let's talk about the sounds we're getting here. Here's our row. Here's the 12 tones in their order. And if I'm not loud enough, just make signs to me and I'll try to speak up a little bit more. Here's the row. It's beautiful, isn't it? And it's not particularly dissonant or sharp or spiky, rather consonant. What's the sound that he ends with? It's a good old minor triad. It's a very tonal sound. Here's another one that we get. Or in other places it's this. A tonal sound. It's a 12-tone row, but Dalla Piccola is drawing the sounds that he wants out of it. Now, there's so many things I could say, but let's see here. Okay, that row in itself is a melody, but you might have heard a melody that's hidden within that row, and it goes like this. This one. That one, this one. You hear that gentle descending line it's going? So it went from here to here, to here, to here, to here. And then what he does is he's going to retrograde the row. When we retrograde a line that's going down, what do you get? A line that goes up. And so here, see if you hear this very close descending melody that I just played for you going up in this one. You hear that? So there's definitely a line that's going through, and then when you heard different kinds of overlapping things, that's because there's actually a canon going on. Some more imitation. It's just a little hard to hear, and that's why the colors come in the way that they do. So that's Dalla Piccola. And by the way, there's a kind of Bach homage going on here too, and so there are references there as well. Any thoughts or comments? Yes, Keith?
Is this the same David Birch that taught here at CU, Boulder, back in the 1960s?
Yes, he did. Yeah, and then he taught at East Bend, which is where he was actually. That's how he was with Crumb, or played Crumb's music. Okay, well we need to go back for a second. All right, serial music. You probably know, pioneered by this guy, Arnold Schoenberg. And it's important to note that he didn't view 12-tone music as a revolution or a negation of what had come before, but rather as an inevitable outcome of the music that he had inherited. So tonal music, romantic music had to develop here. He had to write this music, and it was 12-tone music. The primary early 12-tone composers were Schoenberg, and you may know his students also, Webern and Berg, often known as the Second Viennese School, the first Viennese School being Haydn, Mozart, Beethoven, this being the second. Even these three composers, their rows have very different sounds. So let me play you, this is a row from Arnold Schoenberg's Orchestral Variations, Opus 31. Oh, oop. Okay, here's a row from Webern. And a row from Berg. So that was Webern's string quartet, opus 28. This is Berg's violin concerto. There's a little intro, and then you have the row in the violin. I'm not sure if you noticed how lyrical that was, that last one. Maybe I should just start that again. Such a gorgeous piece, but different sounds in these rows. So here's the Schoenberg row. This also somewhat lyrical, but in a different kind of way. That's the Schoenberg row. Here's the Webern row, and you might notice some special characteristics about Webern's rows. Here it is, sort of in the simplest form. Webern loves to use this interval. It's the smallest possible interval, the semitone. You hear them, they're all over the place. Those are all that interval, favorite of Webern's. But the other thing you might notice is economy of means. So typical of Webern is he can build his whole row just from the first 4 notes. So here's the first 4 notes. Here's the last 4 notes. Hear how it's the same, it's just higher? And here's the middle 4 notes. It's just backwards. It's the same. So this is called a derived row, but essentially he's building this very, very tightly constructed row, and that's Webern for you. You've got this really tight structure. Now here's Berg's row. See what you hear. Starts this way. Minor triad. We're in tonal land. Major triad. Minor triad. Major triad. And then we have this little scale. So Berg, out of those 3 second Viennese composers, is going to be the one who refers the most to materials from the past, from the tonal tradition. And you often hear him using these kinds of sounds. Okay, that was a really quick foray into serial music and the 12-tone composers. You're all still with me, right? Okay, so we've already seen one example of textural music, and now I'm going to take you to another early one, another Polish composer. You already saw his name. It's Penderecki. The example I'm going to show you is an iconic example from 1960. It was really influential in creating the trend of textural composition. So let's listen to about 2 minutes of this. I'm just going to... Pretty different from what we just heard, huh? What were the instruments? Strings. 52 string players. I'm going to show you the score. Penderecki had to create his own notation for his sounds. And this, so this triangle for Penderecki means highest possible pitch. And Abigail, you're here. Thanks, come on up. So Abigail Dreyer, is that correct? Okay, Abigail Dreyer, so kindly, is going to help us see how this works on a viola. So the highest possible pitch, this is not a fixed pitch. It's not a determinate pitch. It's basically how far can you reach up to find that note, and then whatever that is, that's what you're playing, is highest possible pitch. And Abigail will show us in just one moment. Thanks so much for coming. So it's basically as far as she can reach up on her strings to get that highest possible note. That's just stay there because we got more coming. But you'll notice here also we have spatial notation. So this is supposed to last for 15 seconds. This is supposed to last for 11 seconds, and so on. It's just spatially laid out, not like regular notes. I'm curious about what you heard at the end of the part that we were listening to.
Some percussive sounds.
Percussive sounds. Do you want to hear that again? Okay, just a little bit of it. Tell me what you're hearing. Just generally, how would you describe that? Yes?
Maybe they're playing with the part of the bows that doesn't have the hair.
Yeah, They are playing with the wood of the bow, absolutely, you're right, and that's called Coleño. Other observations. Just what did it sound like to you? Yes.
Slapping and flapping.
Okay, and what's being conveyed? Like, does it sound really rigid or systematic or?
Improvisation.
Yeah, it sounds like improvisation or chaos or like there's no order. Okay, you might be interested to know that he creates this chaos through serial means. So let's have a look here. So let's look at this. These are the cellos, and each cello is supposed to just pick one of these patterns and play it. And the symbols that are going on here, and this is where Abigail's going to help us, this symbol means play a quarter tone. So we're not playing the 12 notes that we have on the piano, we're in the cracks between them. So you might just want to play the regular notes and then show where the quarter tone lies.
Okay. So this is a B. This is a C natural. And then a quarter tone.
Cool, thanks. And then the next thing, what does this triangle mean? Highest possible note, but this is supposed to be a pits. Highest possible pits. Okay, so you can't even really hear the pitch. Then this one is between the bridge and the tail piece, and it's arco. So I don't know how you want to describe that sound, but it's not like a regular, can you just play a regular, note? Right, and then play the kind of eerie. Okay, and then we have, here's the coleño, so with the wood of the bow arpeggiated behind the bridge. Okay, great. So what Penderecki has done is he's created a row with 7 things like this. And the player is supposed to execute that over and over as quickly as possible. Now, here's what's interesting. Here's the row. It's a particular ordering, but this one, you might notice, it's the same row but backwards. There's a little typo, I think, where there's something different, but it's basically the same thing backwards. And this is a particular permutation of the first one, and this is also a particular systematic permutation of the first one. So he's serializing this thing. And these 4 patterns, you get the same 4 patterns here in the violas, but they're backwards order. So he's creating this whole chaotic sound world by being very systematic, using serialism, and also using something called aleatory, where the players are choosing what they're doing, like they're choosing which pattern. Are there any questions about that? Abigail, thank you so much for showing us this. I'm going to play you a little bit more, and the part that I'm playing you is here. We're going to start right here. It's a little bigger than I expected. Okay, we're going to start right here, and what you have is that each player is playing a different note, but quarter tones. So what you get is he's filling in bandwidth. So it's sort of a whole wall of quarter tones in all of the instruments. And then we'll continue from there. That's the little score bit that you have on your handouts. This piece is really famous. It's called Threnody for the Victims of Hiroshima, which means lament. But actually, Penderecki actually called it that later. His first name for it was 8 minutes 37 seconds. Let's move on to our third trend, minimalism. Minimalism, a movement in art, dance, music, and so on that began in the 1960s. And it's often characterized as having limited materials, gradual processes, and emphasizing the surface of the art. So I thought it might be fun to look at some art. You know, we're in music and it's like, oh, we can look at something else. So here is, this is Dan Flavin, The Colors of the French Republic. So just some examples of minimalism, but Donald Judd from the Stacks series, very geometrically arranged. This is one of my favorites, Sol LeWitt, conceptual artist. This reminds me of some of the music that I know. And then this one, Robert Ryman, white enamel paint on an aluminum sheet. The bolts are part of the composition. Okay, so just a few art examples. And oh, I need to turn this off. So now I'd like to talk to you about an American composer, Steve Reich, minimalist composer, and there he is. And the other members of my quartet are here and are going to help out with this. So Patrick Sutton's here, John Gunther, and Michael Tetro. And they're going to help us learn about this piece, Clapping Music, written in 1980. So first, if you're comfortable, I would invite you to stand up, and Mike's going to teach you this pattern. If you're up for it, just stand up. We've got to get moving a little bit.
So this composition is for a bunch of hands clapping. And the material is based off of a 16-note sill. 12, I mean. So. I have a 5-month-old, so you. So the way we break it down, our group is made up of a saxophone, a keyboard. I often play sticks, and a guitar, and it kind of works perfectly for this. So if you could just stay with me for a second, and here's the tempo. Saxophone, keyboard, sticks, guitar. 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 Okay, so now we're going to say that as well as clap it at the same time. All right? Do it again. Ready? And. This is what I tell people when I say I'm a drummer, and oh, I can never be a drummer, I have terrible rhythm. I said, no, you don't. You can get a room full of people to play syncopated pattern in 30 seconds. You're all in good shape. So we're going to do this a little bit faster. So saxophone, keyboard, sticks, guitar. Let's just say it first. Go. Saxophone, keyboard, sticks, guitar. Saxophone, keyboard, sticks, guitar. Saxophone, keyboard, sticks, guitar. Great. Let's keep the same tempo and we'll clap and say it. Ready, and. The cell, and that's pattern number 1. And in fact, Stephanie, show this.
Yeah, I can actually.
Oh, you have it?
Yeah, before you go for it.
Okay.
So if you guys just want to, if you would like to sit down, please do so, and I'll have you just move out of the way for a second of the screen. So you're still going to be doing more. You didn't practice that for nothing, but you sounded really great. This piece is for 2 sets of hands, and you guys might, yeah. So the first set of hands just repeats this pattern over and over again. The second set of hands begins together with the first, but then after a few repetitions, jumps so that it moves one syllable ahead of the first set of hands. Repeats that a few times, then jumps again until they are 2 syllables ahead. Repeats that a few times, jumps so that they are 3 syllables ahead, 4 syllables, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. And since the pattern contains 12 syllables, if you count the green spaces between the words after 12 syllables, the 2 sets of hands are lined back up again. So Mike is going to do this with you. Patrick and John, we're going to have you be the first set of hands. So you're just going to do your pattern over and over. You're not going to move. And then Mike's going to be jumping against you. 1 syllable ahead, then 2 syllables ahead. Okay, so I'll let you guys do it.
So let's go back to, we won't say it this time, we'll just clap it. So here's the tempo. We'll go a little slow first, and then we'll do the real tempo. And, here we go, 1, 2, 3, and.
Mike against 60 others, that's pretty good. I would say we have to give him thanks. Thanks a lot, guys. So it's kind of interesting. It might have been hard to hear everything that was going on, but it's interesting to see what happens to the green spaces, like the silences or what musicians call rests. So here are our rests. And let's see what happens when the second set of hands jumps by 1 syllable. What happened to the rests? There aren't any because every time there's a rest, the other set of hands fills it in. Let's see what happens with 2 syllables. Any rests? Yeah, there's one right there. Let's see what happens when you jump 3 syllables. Yeah, a couple, right? Right there. So it's kind of interesting because in this piece, as the second set of hands is jumping, there are 3 places where all the rests fill in. So we already saw one of them. After 1 jump, 1 syllable ahead, they're all filled in. Can you guess where the next one is? Midpoint of the piece, 6 syllables ahead. Can you guess the last one? It's symmetrical. So it's the penultimate place, 11 syllables ahead, right before the second set of hands rejoins the first. Okay, so Mike, John, and Patrick are going to perform the piece for you now. And just listen and hear whatever you'd like to hear.
average musician tell whether they got it right?
You guys tell me. If there were any mistakes. No, they're not going to tell us. Yes? I don't know. What do you think?
Could this be in relation to cantejondo, Spanish cantejondo?
You know, I don't know that genre. You'll have to tell me more about it later. But you know, actually that rhythmic pattern is a West African rhythmic pattern. And Steve Reich studied with a drummer from Ghana. And you definitely have these strong influences from other traditions. Balinese, not in this particular piece, but in other Steve Reich minimalist pieces. And you might know Steve Reich is known sometimes as one of the Fab Four of minimalism, one of the early four, like not the Beatles, but the Fab Four of minimalism. Philip Glass, Terry Riley, Lamont Young, and then Steve Reich. Other questions or comments? Please do bring them up if you'd like to. Yes?
So how do the musicians themselves keep it straight?
How do the musicians themselves keep it straight?
So I play the part that moves around, and I mean, for me, when I was tapping or saying it before, saxophone, keyboard, sticks, guitar, saxophone, keyboard, sticks, guitar. I'm thinking of it in terms of three. So someone was counting like 1 and 2 and 3 and bum 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 bum. So for me, I break the cell up into 3, and then I just play whatever pattern it happens to be. So it's bum 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 whatever it happens to be. For the guys that keep it straight, I don't know. You guys, can you answer that?
Yeah, we ignore you.
Yeah. Which is generally a wise idea.
Well, actually, kind of in the middle of that, I started trying to look at Mike's part and figure out, and I got off a little bit. So I was like, oh god, I gotta ignore him and pay attention.
So you kind of turn your ears off. You do your own thing.
Yeah, not to get too distracted or kind of engaged in that part, because for our part's a little simpler, but to just stay focused on that.
Any other questions? Yes.
How much were these three traditions influenced by each other? Since it looked like at least 2 of them were occurring around the same time.
The three, are you talking about serialism
Yeah.
and minimalism and
Yeah.
textural music? Well, textural music, serialism was much earlier. And textural music, as you saw, like this early textural music actually draws on serial techniques, as we saw in that crazy chaotic section, to create the sounds that are going on. So it's funny how, even though we're working with textures in that early time, serial methods are still one of the ways to build that texture. I'll show you something really crazy in that Penderecki piece. I'll have to show you on my score. At one point, the 52 string players break up into 3 orchestras. And here's one orchestra, and here's 2 orchestras, and you see how they're doing these crazy sounds that Abigail was demonstrating? The 2 orchestras are in canon, like literally in canon, but flipped, like what's on the top is on the bottom. It's just totally serial techniques, but it doesn't sound anything like that. It sounds totally chaotic. Minimalism. Interesting. Can someone help me on this? Minimalism and serialism and textual music. That's a really great question. Yeah, Steve.
Well, I think in some of the phase pieces in that part, and some, we were playing the violin phase as we were coming in, there is a feeling of this sort of subtly shifting textural patterns.
Yes.
That would be a similarity.
Yeah.
The way it's built with some of the sounds.
That's absolutely true. So minimalist music and the process that was going on that we saw with one pattern shifting against itself, that's called phase shifting. And as a result, you get these kinds of textures especially when you have more than 2 lines. Like here we only have 2 lines, but often you have more. And so the textures are constantly shifting. It's like wallpaper. You know, suddenly you see this pattern, then you see this pattern because everything is suddenly shifting. So there are those kinds of aesthetic connections. And I would have to think more about your question because that's a really great one. But in terms of the structure of the patterns that are being used in minimalism, there's some very, it's almost opposite in a sense to serialism because serialism uses everything. We have 12 notes, well, at least at that point, right? We essentially have 12 notes. Serialism uses all of it. So I remember actually Jim with Mitchell had sent me an email saying, in this music, I hear some music where nothing repeats, and another of it I hear where everything repeats, and that's serialism. You have all 12 notes, so you're constantly cycling around the entire pitch universe. Whereas in minimalism, it's the opposite. Limited materials, so you might only have those 4 notes. I didn't answer your question about influence, but sometimes you also have things happening as a reaction. So textural music happening as a reaction to serial music because you have this total control. There's also that. Great question. Okay. The last piece that we would like to talk to you about is by a young composer named Vineet Shende. There he is. Well, no picture, but he teaches at Bowdoin College, and the piece is called Throw Down or Shut Up. This was the first piece that we ever played together, which is why we have our funny name, but it's probably appropriate to our personality as a group. So Throw Down or Shut Up, and I'm not going to make a claim that this is, whether or not this is truly modernist, but in terms of its very careful attention to compositional structure, I would say it resembles a lot of the more classic modernist composers. There are 2 main influences in this piece: James Brown, soul brother number 1, and Olivier Messiaen, French avant-garde composer par excellence. And I'm going to play you a little clip from James Brown. You'll hear some of the noises that you will hear in this piece. And you might hear these little riffs, like little instrumental things that are going on in the texture that you will also hear in our piece. So here's James Brown.
We're back one more time. Get on up, get up, get on up, stay on the scene, get on up, sex machine, get on up, Dave, get on up, piano, get on up, say, Dave, get on up, piano, get on up, now, Dave, get on up, piano, get on up, say, Dave, get on up, piano, over here, get on up, now, Dave, get on up, piano, get on up, say.
So you might hear some of these sounds harmonic and also some of the vocalizations. It's a little bit nuts. And now here is an example from Olivier Messiaen. This is his Oiseaux Exotiques, exotic birds, and completely different musical language. That was Simon Rattle conducting. So it's interesting because the musical languages are so different, but Vineet Shende talks about mapping some of Messiaen's pitch collections. So sometimes it's stuff like this. Mapping those onto some of James Brown's rhythmic tattoos. And this is such a classic modernist ploy of relating pitch and rhythm and using the same structure in both pitch and rhythm. It's one of the things that goes on in this piece. On the surface, I'll give you a few things to listen for. We're going to perform it for you in a little bit. You'll hear a process of contraction. So stuff getting shorter and shorter. And this very opening bit right here, you'll hear the notes getting closer and closer together in rhythm. You hear that, how it sort of accelerates as it goes? And the other thing that it does is in pitch, it actually converges. So we have this going down to that, and on the bottom we have this. So we're converging on that one point, accelerating to it. And so here's this motto again that appears over and over in the piece, but in slightly different versions, and that usually marks, hey, here's where a section begins or ends, usually begins. Hear how it went together to that one point? Okay, so contraction, that's one thing that happens. And the other thing, if you guys want to come up, we're going to demonstrate a little bit. This is our measure 23.
I'm sorry to digress. I just wanted to note the conductor, did you say it was Messiaen?
No, it was Simon Rattle. Yeah. So another thing that we do is we have these riffs. We sort of trade off these little jabs with one another, and they're incredibly difficult to play because we have to interlock, but here's a simple example. 23 to the downbeat of 24. Wait 1 second. Yes. Sorry, let's do that again. It didn't really work. As I said, it's kind of hard. And by the way, what you're hearing is only the riffs, and in the actual piece, there's all these noodle things that go on behind the riffs also. Okay, so that's just an example of the riffs. Everyone always asks why it's called throw down or shut up. And it's because in the middle of the piece, we all have to throw down a solo. The piece is in 3 big sections. You have all this opening stuff, and then there's a funk section in the middle, and then the opening stuff comes back. So we'd like to perform this for you, and then when we're done, we'd love it if you have any more questions or comments about the whole presentation or about this piece or whatever you'd like to talk about.
rehearsing and learning that piece together.
We were just saying we're not terrified now.
It's going to take you 4 years. No, seriously.
When Daphne first approached me about playing, she sent me an email and said, hey, I'm planning this concert, would you like to play this piece? And I said, yeah, sure, that would be great, I'd love to. And then she sent the piece and I looked at it and I thought, there's no way I'm ever going to be able to play this. And I almost called you and said, I'm sorry, but I just still might. I'm sorry.
I said in my email there's grunting in it. And he said, oh, I'm all for grunting.
I mean, I don't know about you guys, but I spend 10 times as much amount of time learning my part as we've ever spent together.
Yeah,
Probably more.
Yeah, not only are all our parts technically very difficult, like in terms of our, the way we play our instruments, but also putting them together, the rhythms are incredibly sophisticated and the way they match up looks intimidating on the page. And so it took a lot of individual work and then a lot of group work too.
The metronome helps, like even for group work.
Oh yeah.
Do you have someone that you kind of follow if you get separated?
There was one part where it's like, oh, John's over there.
There's some landmarks, there's some road signs.
3 times where I was like, Daphne's there, I'll go there.
Yeah. There was another question. Yes.
I was gonna ask, do you find music that's for those 4 instruments, or do you do some arranging?
That's an excellent question. Somebody want to answer?
Do we find music for
these 4
for
instruments?
these? That was really the genesis of the group, was this instrumentation in this piece. But then we've also, I'm sorry. So that was the genesis of this piece, or this group was the instrumentation that this piece was written for. And then we found some additional pieces with the same instrumentation, and we've also composed some works as well.
So there's an iconic work by Louis Andriessen, the Dutch composer, that is for these instruments. That's actually, you know how we heard a canon at the beginning, just the imitation going one voice after another? It's a constant canon for all 4 voices that are really fast tempo, like 16th notes, and like poor John never has a chance to breathe. But that was the piece that started us off actually when I was looking to put this group together. And because that piece is an iconic piece, Andriessen was like, this instrumentation is a little weird, right? Andriessen was going against the norms, like symphony orchestras were not his thing. He wanted to do things that were breaking the mold. And he most certainly did, and this piece is well known, so there are other pieces that have been written for the same instrumentation like this one. But John's actually written pieces for us. We have a setting of Maurice Sendak's Where the Wild Things Are. John has also arranged other things for us, like some Chick Corea pieces. And and we've just made some things up. Anybody want to say anything else? Okay, and there was, I think there was another question.
That was kind of my question. I wondered if you were composing or where you get these pieces.
Yeah, I kind of dig.
What do you all find most rewarding about playing modern music?
For me, we're living in the age of percussion in many ways. If the 19th century if the 18th century was the age of the violin, let's say, and the 19th century was the age of the piano, people can argue that anyway from Sunday, but certainly the 20th century was the century of the percussion instruments. So, the range and the breadth and the scope of what I get to have to play is just immense. Originally, this piece was written for another keyboard to be placed over here, and all those fast things were flying all over the place. Half the notes are there and half the notes are here. Now that's technically impossible. I learned after 3 months, but the boundaries are constantly growing. And we get, the other thing is for percussion, we get to play with other instruments. The first music we have by composers you all recognize is like Beethoven and Mozart, which is amazing, but that was a very limited amount of instruments and very limited scope. Sort of around the 1920s, Stravinsky writing Springish, then all of a sudden the floodgates opened up, and we have instruments 2 rooms down from just about every sort of country or region in the world. So that's for me.
Go ahead.
Oh no, you go.
I love striking out on new paths. Like, it's a challenge. And because every composer and almost every piece has its own language, so you're discovering these new languages. One thing that's great about composers of say, classical or romantic is that there's a common language. Like Haydn, Mozart, and Beethoven, there's a common syntax and pitch. And here, everyone is different and creating a new thing, and I just love like exploring, it's like going camping and finding this great hike. Patrick.
I was going to say, one of my favorite things, this piece is actually a perfect example because the synthesis of genre and of different styles is one of my, as a guitarist, a guitar's a very versatile instrument, and I like to play a lot of different kinds of music, and so especially modern chamber music gives me that opportunity to be on a concert stage, but also use some of the other skills I have and some of my other strengths. So I love this sort of cross-pollination of genres that goes on in modern music particularly.
And I'd agree with Patrick, and the challenge of playing this is really engaging. And then also for me, it's been the process of just hanging out with these guys and playing music has been really fun. They're all fantastic musicians and good people and good friends. So just getting together to work on this has been fun.
Yeah, for me it's just great. Like, we come from different musical backgrounds, and it's just so cool to it's like exploring different cultures. I think there was a question here, and then we have one over there. Was there one on this side? And then over here.
How do you get the metronome to the lab? Because when I do with my brother, we never hear the metronome. So how do you get a metronome loud enough for all of you here?
Excellent question.
I was looking. Yeah, you want to answer?
Oh, we plug it into the stereo, and then it hammers away at us.
It's really annoying.
It's really loud.
Any last questions? Yes?
Have you ever considered involving a vocalist with your, because I was almost hearing a certain cabaret style,
Okay.
and I thought maybe a vocalist would be an interesting addition.
We actually have a piece in the works written by a student here at CU, Connor Brown, that is based on some Georgian choral music, like not Georgia the state, Georgia the country. And that originally was written for a singer with a mixed ensemble, and he rearranged it for us. Basically, the saxophone became the singer. But if you know any singers who want to jam, sure.
Yes?
You were talking about the age of violins and piano and percussion. In my mind, I think from the Moog synthesizer to Pro Tools, we're living in the age where things are happening that can't be played live. And so is that a familiar age? Are we in the age of the impossible music that can't be played, but can be recorded?
It's interesting because the abilities of performers have increased along with the difficulty of music. I didn't play you any Milton Babbitt, who's a prototypical serialist, American serialist, but in the 1960s, he was the first person to use the RCA Mark II synthesizer, and you could probably do what he did then on a laptop, but when you look at pictures, he's like in an airport control room, and it was all punch cards. But that serial music, because he was serializing not only pitch, but rhythm and other kinds of things going on. So there you have one of the trends we talked about, serialism, but a totally different kind of instrument. But as composers got more complicated in their writing, like there are things that people can play now that people didn't used to be able to play. Like 50 years ago, it's like athletes, everything gets kind of harder and better. I don't know if anyone has anything else. Okay.
Yeah, and I think when I was saying that, I was thinking more in terms of the sort of instrument that grew the most during that time. And you're right, I mean, certainly at this point in the last, 30, 40 years, digital music is, well, it exists, it didn't exist before, right? But in terms of how that plays out over time, I'm not quite sure.
Taking the two samples of James Brown's Drummers now is all over the place. We took a sample of what you just did. That's going to continue to exponentially grow to some other form, if it were possible to think outside the box. Like we're still expanding in a multi-universe kind of way here.
Yeah. Computer music, there's so many things that are being done with it now, and there's also electroacoustic music, where you have both live players and computer things, and you're syncing up and so on. Any last questions? Keith? And then
the solos that you threw down, were they improvised or written?
and then we mostly played them.
Yeah, it's a combination of both.
Last question.
Do you have any performances scheduled?
Nothing coming up.
Not yet. But if you
Tomorrow
would like
afternoon,
to,
we're rehearsing.
yeah, but if you would like to hear more about us, please talk to me and I can get your email and put you on our list. Also, if you're interested in connecting with the theory department with these kinds of things that we do, and we also have, you know, once every 4-month email kind of thing. I think the email list, is it on the coffee table?
Oh, it's
go-
circulating, I don't
it's-
want to do that myself.
Okay, if whoever has the email list, perhaps, oh yeah, if we could get it eventually, if we get to the coffee table eventually, that'd be great. Thank you.